Let's talk a bit about Labour. How bad is it as far as the voters are concerned?
I was a pollster for Theresa May when she was in government. Theresa May's ratings look fantastic compared to Keir Starmer's. I think Reform as a brand is not that amazing, but Farage's brand is very strong. They're looking for someone strong, they're looking for someone authentic, and they feel they get that with Nigel Farage. This is a very, very, very dark moment indeed for the Conservative Party. It is not hyperbole to say that they are on the brink of extinction.
There's a lot of discussion, particularly about the loss of centrist Tories.
I think they live in Rory Stewart's head. The centrist Tory is dead.
Hello, I'm Fraser Myers, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by James Johnson, co-founder of JL Partners. James, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We've just come off the back of party conference season. The party leaders have been setting out their stall. But I want to talk to you about the people who matter a lot more to politics, which is the voters out there and what they think. So if we start with Reform, who are topping the polls, what do you think? Who is voting for Reform and what is their main issue? What is it that's really driving people towards Nigel Farage?
So half of Reform's current support in the polls is made up of really those people we've been talking about for quite some time in British politics. People who voted Brexit in the Brexit referendum. They're more likely to be white. They're more likely to be working class. They're more likely not to have gone to university. And they've basically felt the strain on their finances. And they've looked around. They're frustrated about immigration. They're frustrated about the state of public services. They tried Labour. They tried the Conservatives under Boris Johnson. And now they've settled on Nigel Farage. That makes up about half of Reform's coalition. The rest of their voters are a mix of some pensioners are in there. There's also people who are a bit more middle-aged working age, and also some younger people on the right as well. But that's their sort of main bulk. And really, the sense that I get when I run focus groups in the UK is that people aren't necessarily running towards Reform with open arms, celebrating, excited. They just feel they've got no alternative. They have been failed by the two main parties, and they feel that that's where they've got to go now. I do think too, Nigel Farage is a huge part of it. I think Reform as a brand is not that amazing, but Farage's brand is very strong. They're looking for someone strong, they're looking for someone authentic, and they feel they get that with Nigel Farage.
And in terms of, we've obviously got a few years to go till the next election. If Reform wants to expand on its support, retain that support, what do you think it has to do? Is it talking to more of the same people? Is it expanding those kinds of Brexit voters, or are there other groups it should be going after?
Well, the fascinating thing about that group I talked about, the sort of white working class, leave voting group, we call them the pessimistic patriots. They're very patriotic, but they're very pessimistic about the future of the country. That group, Reform actually has more to win. Our modelling shows that around 1 in 4 of current Conservative voters match the profile of those pessimistic patriots. Now, that's amazing news if you're Reform, because quite rarely are you able to say to a party, you have this support and you also have more potential supporters who look like your current support out there. So that's a double whammy win for Reform in terms of growing their vote, because they don't need to do too much different to what they're currently doing. There is another group, though, that they do need to win. And this is the group that is the sort of the final stand for the Conservatives, the final shield, the last spluttering life force that the Conservative Party has, which is the pensioner vote. And that group, over 65, quite affluent, worried about their pension and their pension security, they are still sticking with the Conservatives and aren't yet ready to come over to Reform, despite agreeing with Reform on a lot of other issues. So I think, yes, Reform can grow amongst the voters it most appeals to, but they also need to think about that older vote, that grey vote, if they really want to eclipse the Conservative Party. That's the key thing they need to grow on. And Farage needs to think a lot about what's his message on pensions, what's his message on the economy, and what's his message to reassure those people that their pension and savings are going to be safe with him.
And are there any sorts of voters that perhaps Nigel Farage shouldn't spend too much time courting? I mean, there's a very, active conversation on X around things like immigration that sound like they're the sort of topics that might cross over with Farage's support, but there's maybe a more sort of ethno-nationalist tone. Farage has always been careful not to be seen as too pally with Tommy Robinson. What do you think about that? Are there people he should avoid, or voters that maybe might not help him out?
Yeah, so when you're thinking about how to win votes in Britain, immigration is a huge issue, and people are concerned about its impact on schools, on healthcare, on housing. They feel they've not given permission for the level of change that's happened. And that's an economic impact, but it's also a cultural impact too. That feeling of, my town centre's changed immeasurably over the last 10 or 15 years, even in places with relatively low levels of immigration. If that's gone from nothing to low, that's a big change for people. But what the public don't see immigration as is this kind of more sort of clash of civilizations, Christianity versus Islam, and certainly do not see it through a race lens. White versus non-white. So Farage and Reform need to be very careful not to be seen to be on that territory. At the moment, they're on the right side of that line. But what I sort of refer to as, and what lots of people refer to as the online right, some of those groups that perhaps look a little bit more like the Rupert Lowe's and Tommy Robinsons of this world, making those more ethno-nationalist arguments about immigration, also making very small state conservative arguments about the size of the state and the level of taxation, libertarian arguments. Those are not resonating with the voters as much. And I think what we see from Farage holding back from that is that he gets that, and he understands that to get to 40% in British politics, or even 35% in British politics, you can't go down that route. So I would say there's a big learning there. We did a load of modelling that we presented at the Reform Party conference, showing what impact winning different groups would have on different seats. And basically, if you go down pursue the online right group, Reform actually falls very far short of a majority, because they're losing those voters in the centre, and even actually some of the pessimistic patriot groups that I mentioned. So they really need to think about that. Don't go too right, because actually it's a very small percentage of the population. Only about 8% or so of the population look like the Rupert Lowe's and Tommy Robinsons. The other 90% look very different indeed.
And just briefly, you mentioned small state libertarianism. There is this tension clearly in Reform between, I think you see Nigel Farage coming up with ideas like renationalising British Steel, but at the same time there is a sort of low tax cutting wing of the party, and perhaps even that's inside Nigel Farage. Maybe they exist both within him. You've suggested there that really that is on a hiding to nothing. That sort of libertarian outlook is not popular in the country. Is that right?
Yeah, I think on that, the key thing is that I actually take the view that you can sell quite a lot to the public, and it's really important for pollsters like me that we aren't seen as that we're not going, oh, the public think X, therefore do X. I think that is really dangerous for politics. It's really dangerous for our profession. The best pollsters and the best use of pollsters by politicians are people who say, I want to achieve this, tell me how best to message it and land it. So tone matters, and that, like I talked about immigration, that tone and message really matters. But, I think you can sell this stuff. I think Liz Truss could have actually sold the sort of smaller state libertarian stuff if she'd have done it in the right way and it had paid off in results. So I don't necessarily think it's a no-go zone for Farage, but I do think that as long as it's linked to economic credibility and competence, then that's the key. But I think in terms of, when he gets in, the best route for Farage for the country and for winning over the public would be to focus on whatever works best for the economy. I think when you're messaging that, though, you need to really present competence. And clearly there is a danger zone on the small state stuff because Liz Truss was not the best advertisement for that in government.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And let's talk a bit about Labour. It's not going well, famously. How bad is it as far as the voters are concerned? Just how dismayed are they by the state of this government?
It's pretty bad. I mean, I was a pollster for Theresa May when she was in government under the Conservatives, and I used to go every month. I used to write a note for her and present it to her and say, this month, Prime Minister, your approval rating is minus 25, 4 points down on last month. It was never particularly good news for her. Theresa May's ratings look fantastic compared to Keir Starmer's. And indeed, Kemi Badenoch, I should add. This is the public are very disappointed with the work of the Labour government so far. They don't feel like it's addressed their key issues, and they don't feel like their values are in the right place either. However, the big but is that I still think Labour are underpriced when it comes to the next election, and the reason is that we are not in a space where they need to win 40% to win a majority. They just need to be ahead of the other parties. And actually, they can win a big majority even on 31% of the vote. All they need to do is rally the left around them. If they can get some of those Green voters back, some of those Lib Dem voters back, if they can get back up to 30%, even with a very competitive Conservatives or Reform Party, Labour could well sneak back in, even on these historic low approval ratings. And this is why you see Starmer doing this Starmer versus Farage argument, because they're trying to get the left behind them. So that's the real focus for Labour at the moment. If I were Labour, I wouldn't be worrying too much about what the whole country thought of me. I'd be thinking I need to get those left-wingers on board, because if they make it the left versus Farage, they might just do it. So, people watching this might think there's no way that Labour could get re-elected if they're on approval rating of -50 or even -60 in some polls. Actually, my view is that they're probably on track at the moment to get re-elected, because we are still the main left-wing party, whereas the right is split.
And in terms of the sort of challenges to Labour from the left, is it mostly Lib Dems? Is it mostly Greens? Is there an even split? Is it mostly people just giving up and not supporting, defecting to apathy?
I think the big threat at the moment is the Greens. And we've seen them go up in some polls, even to as high as 15%. Zach Polanski, the new Green Party leader, clearly making an impact, clearly being very unapologetically out there on his views. He reminds me a little bit of the New York mayoral candidate Zoran Mandani in New York City, where a similar sort of campaign has very much excited younger left-wing people who feel that Labour, or in their case the Democrats, aren't representing their views, and they look for a more sort of insurgent populist candidate on the left. So I do think that's eating into Labour's vote. There's a bit of Lib Dem. There was a lot of excitement earlier this year about whether this Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana new party, your party, still pending a name, would cut through. I think we've seen such organisational chaos on that front that I can't see that many people voting for it as it stands. But look, if they end up launching, it could be very different in a year's time. So there are definitely these forces on the left eating away at Labour's vote. I do suspect that come an election, if it really is that forced choice between a Labour Prime Minister and a Reform Prime Minister, I think quite a lot of those voters may well come home to Labour.
And in terms of going back to Labour's performance in government, what is it that people are saying that is, for them, the most, the worst thing about them? What has Labour got wrong the most? Because there is obviously a general sense that the government's not performing, but are there any particular policies or moments that stand out?
I think there's one big one, and we asked the public 1 year in, what do you feel is Labour's biggest mistake in government? And the big one was that winter fuel allowance decision last year, the removal of winter fuel allowance from some pensioners and some poorer pensioners. That was a real hit to Labour's brand, because a lot of voters felt we weren't told about this in advance. Also, is this really what Labour stands for? It felt punitive. Interestingly, Labour had now reversed their position on that policy, but that hasn't cut through at all. So people still think that what happened originally is the policy. So that had a big blow, and I think it had a blow on Labour's values, but I also think it ate up quite a lot of goodwill that was out there. British public are pretty open to give people a chance, and they were ready to see what Labour and Starmer would do in government. That eroded a lot of their goodwill. Immigration is also a big issue, and the hotels and so on. Clearly, that's something that voters feel that Labour has lost total control on. But in terms of what the voters say is their most important thing, it is that winter fuel allowance decision.
And let's talk a bit about the Conservatives. Obviously, they came off the back of a historic election defeat, and it seems to have only got worse for them since.
Yeah, this is a very, very, very dark moment indeed for the Conservative Party. It is not hyperbole to say that they are on the brink of extinction. They are down. They've lost 40% of their vote since the general election in 2024. Most of that to reform. And there aren't many signs it's coming back. Although Kemi Badenoch had a good conference speech, she announced a popular policy in terms of stamp duty, it doesn't seem to have done anything to really shift their position in the polls. And I think that's obvious why that is. It wasn't a fundamental rewriting of the Conservative brand. Voters feel that the Conservatives failed them in government and they want to see something completely new and a real sense of contrition and solutions to what they got wrong. And I think that although there was some feel-good vibes to that conference, and although there was a popular policy in the stamp duty removal, that didn't rewrite the brand in the way that Tony Blair did for Labour in the 90s with Clause 4, in the way that Cameron did with the Conservatives in the late 2000s with modernisation. We're not seeing that moment for the Conservative Party yet, and it means that they are still, really on the precipice of falling down. If Reform win those pensioners over from the Conservatives, the Conservative vote could go down to 10% or even lower. So, they are in a very, very dangerous place indeed.
And there's a lot of chatter that pins this bad position on the leadership, that says a change of leadership would be the thing to rescue the Conservatives. Do you think that will have as big an impact as some people claim? Is that really the issue, the person at the top?
I think it's probably too early to say on that front. I could see it either way. I mean, look, one thing is for sure, that changing leaders has not exactly helped the Conservatives automatically in the past. But whether it's with a new leader or with this one, I think the key thing is that voters need to feel like that the situation is totally different. And they need to feel like the Conservative Party has learnt lessons and has really got the message. Now, some people might say the current leader is not able to do that. And in that case, I think the argument for a leadership change is probably the right one. Other people say wait, because Kemi Badenoch is getting there. She's taking it slow. She's getting her sort of tanks lined up to have that moment. And in that case, there's an argument for waiting. I have to say, personally on that, I'm on the fence.
Mm. And there's a lot of discussion, particularly media discussion about almost a lot of regret about the loss of centrist Tories. That seems to be certainly in the mainstream media. Do these voters, are there a lot of them, do they really exist, or do they only exist really in the minds of newspaper columnists?
I think they live in Rory Stewart's head. I'm not sure whether I've told Rory Stewart that, don't worry.
Good.
Look, I think that the centrist Tory is dead. The centrist Tory has not been a winnable group for the Conservatives for almost the last 10 years. After Brexit, those voters, younger, middle-class, affluent voters that Cameron won over, in seats like Brighton, Kemp Town, Battersea, were voting Conservative. After Brexit, that changed, and they felt that the Conservatives stood differently to them on various values, whether it was Brexit, whether it was immigration, and what they stood for in government. They aren't coming back. They've not been Conservatives for nearly 10 years. Look at Battersea and Brighton, Kemp Town now. I say to your viewers, look them up on Wikipedia. They're massive Labour majorities. Or Green. The Green vote is also very strong in those seats. It's not coming back, and I think that I'm always amazed when I go to London and meet old Conservative friends and current Conservative MPs about how many people still think there is a path to power through that liberal centrist Tory path. And I say to them, look, there's not many people like you out there in the country. I think they often assume there is, but there just isn't. So that's not to say that the Conservatives don't need to think about a broad church and don't need to think about, areas in the South as well as the areas in the North and the Midlands. But those voters are very different from the liberal centrist ones that they won before. So I have very strong views on this. The game is up. And if you're pursuing these people, and you think that's the path back to the for the Conservatives, then you're on a hiding to nothing, because the fundamental statistic is that 40% of the Conservatives' vote has been lost since 24, and the vast majority of those are to reform. If you even want to get back to the standing start position of 120 seats,
Yeah.
You need to win back those reform voters. There ain't no other choice.
And finally, we are a long way from an election, and it does feel like, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that if reform were to win, this would be a once in 100-year phenomenon of a third party ousting one of the two main parties. How volatile is the public? How volatile are the polls? How big are the kind of swings we might be able to anticipate, or what have we seen in the past couple of years that might suggest that maybe there's really a lot up for grabs in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think the electorate are super volatile. I think that everything is up for grabs. And I think this is the crazy exciting thing about British politics at this point. No one can predict not only what the next election result is going to be, but also what parties will even be in the lead in that election. What the top two parties will be. It could equally be back to the old Conservatives and Labour. It could even be, Reform of the Lib Dems. No one really knows. And I think, that speaks to that voter volatility. Certainly people are not locked into their positions. A good chunk of Reform voters are not locked into their positions. So, Farage can't count on that polling lead necessarily. And there's a lot of flux amongst the other parties too. So yes, I think, if there is one fundamental fact about the UK electorate in the last sort of 10 to 15 years, it's that it's at its most volatile, and it therefore means that there's a lot of flux, there's a lot of opportunity if you're behind, and there's a lot of danger if you're ahead. And that's the challenge for Farage now. He's going to maintain this lead for 3.5 years. That's a tough thing to do.
James Johnson, thank you very much.
Thank you.